Um, well, we're edging towards the end of February, but you can't tell here in Northern California. It's just been the same for months now. We're not getting the usual variety of climate that we enjoy so much. Eventually, though, something pleasant will return. Everything is impermanent, even bad weather. Unless maybe you live, I don't know, the South Pole. I think even in the summer, it's not that great there. So, but I haven't been there. So, um, just, trying to cover all bases here. We are going to meditate for about 20 minutes. People are still coming into the waiting room. So we're going to meditate for about 20 minutes. And then we're going to talk tonight. I'm going to talk about mindfulness in the context. I'm putting it in the context of recovery, but I'm really going to be doing it more. I want to compare some different Buddhist teachings on mindfulness. And hopefully that'll be illuminating to some degree or other for those who are interested. Does it seem like people have stopped arriving? I don't see Charlie. He usually shows up on Friday night, but maybe not. Everybody can't always be here. So yeah, let's start sitting. So just settling into comfortable posture. In a way that you can just feel the body. So energetically, it's helpful if you can be upright, but if there are reasons why you need to recline, you can certainly be mindful in any posture. You can close your eyes, or if you prefer, you can just lower your gaze. We're just really trying to step out of the visual world, the distractions of sight. And as you do that, just noticing what becomes the most obvious, what comes to your attention first. Do you notice your body, or do you notice a thought or emotion? Just part of the initial kind of phase of settling. So starting to let the body soften, releasing the shoulders, softening the belly. And feeling the breath moving in the body. Breathing in, breathing out. It's such a simple instruction that perhaps it doesn't give us enough guidance or information to really know what to do. So to be more specific, Just suggestion is that we either pay attention to the sensations of breath at the nostrils, the touch of air coming in and out, or else to the movement of the belly with the breath as you breathe in and breathe out, rising and falling. So we're placing the attention on a particular point, not just vaguely aware of the breath. And this helps the attention to get more focused, actually creates the potential for more concentration. Doesn't guarantee it, but it helps. So just starting with that, just trying to connect with the sensations of breath. And we want to do this with a kind of easeful attitude. It's not that we're kind of striving to do it right or feel something special or create some powerful mind state. It's really much simpler than that, to just feel and to kind of relax, sit back and just enjoy the breath, breathing in and breathing out. When we do that, we fairly quickly come up against the reality of the mind that likes to think. It's very habitually thinking. And so the mind often wanders from the breath. The breath is such a simple and really somewhat uninteresting thing to feel. It's not dramatic. It's not tremendously pleasurable or fascinating. And so the mind gets attracted to other things. So we can notice what are the things that attract your mind, that pull you away. And we're not spending a lot of time on this question. In fact, it's just in a moment that we see and then return to the breath. See if you can become interested in the breath. What does it really feel like? The in-breath, the out-breath. We take it for granted most of the time. Each breath is actually different from every other breath. We can start to identify different qualities of breath. The Buddha first points to the length of the breath, long or short. But more than that, we can see that there's smooth breath and rough breath. There is a calm breath, and there can be a kind of grasping breath or gasping. And just to become very intimate with this experience. Thoughts can seem almost magnetic, like they draw our attention, can feel like we're compelled to think them. So much more alluring than the simple breath. And we don't want to turn into a kind of conflict or a battle with our thoughts. It's not the point. So in a way, we surrender to the power of the thoughts, but if we're able to, we can keep a certain tether onto the breath, so that even as the thoughts are passing through the mind and pulling the mind, there's still some awareness of the body, the breath, the space of mind in which this is all happening. right. I'm hoping that what I wanted to do tonight turns out to be of interest to people. We on Tuesday we got to step 7 in my book, A Burning Desire, which we've been working with sort of in and out for some time now. And in step 7, I suggest that there are 4 different approaches to change, since step 7 is kind of about change in my view. There are 4 different approaches to change that are offered in Buddhist practices: that mindfulness and insight, calm and concentration, love and compassion, and contemplation and reflection. And so I'm going to wanted to start by talking about mindfulness, but more from a traditional view through the Buddhist lens, and just to put it a little bit in the framework of recovery. Mindfulness offers us a couple of key tools just in entering into recovery and in maintaining recovery. One is the tool of just seeing clearly the energies and impulses, feelings, thoughts that are behind our addiction, that trigger our addiction. So seeing them gives us an opportunity to let them go, or to change, or to not, and kind of to incline towards the more, as the Buddha would say, wholesome, and let go of the unwholesome. And mindfulness also, as a meditation, helps us to let go of stress. I mean, we know it's mindfulness-based stress reduction, so that helps us to maintain our recovery, and it helps our mind to be clearer. And I would say it also helps us to enjoy our lives, because being mindful is being more awake and conscious. So it really functions in many ways to support recovery. And specifically in the 12 steps, we can see that step 1 says we admitted we were powerless. So that admitting and really coming out of denial is, in a sense, an act of mindfulness. And then writing inventory kind of requires that kind of self-reflection that requires mindfulness. So we can see that it also applies then in various different aspects of the process of the 12 steps. And some people say, like, they turn their will and their life over to the power of mindfulness. So it can even be a higher power. It certainly is a powerful tool. So I think there's a good argument for its value in this work that we do. When we look at what the Buddha taught, and I know many of you know that I'm, been getting more and more into kind of the specifics of the early Buddhist teachings called suttas, and trying to kind of interpret the literal words of the Buddha into ways that are useful for us. And I've been working particularly with one sutta, the sutta on mindfulness of breathing, which is the Anapanasati Sutta. And it's kind of the partner sutra or sutta of the Satipatthana, which is the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So that these are the 2 kind of key instruction teachings on how to apply mindfulness, particularly as a meditative practice. And so both of them kind of outline these 4 realms or areas of experience that where we can apply mindfulness. The first is a body, which is what, when we're meditating with the breath, that's the first foundation of mindfulness. But there are other aspects of body. I mean, if you're mindful when you're eating, then that's mindfulness of the body in these terms. If you're mindful of seeing or touching, any kind of sense practice. there's more that the Buddha says, and I might get back to that, but just to be a little more brief in covering these four foundations of mindfulness, as they're called. The second, after body, is feeling. So I'd say that they become sort of more refined or more subtle as we go through the four. So feeling in Buddhist terms is really just about the initial impact and impression that we get through the senses or through the mind. And the Buddha just says there are these three kinds of impact: pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. So this is right away becomes something that's not all that familiar to us in an ordinary way of thinking about our life experience. But it becomes very critical as we kind of delve deeper into it, mainly because we see that this initial impact is what then triggers our response or our reaction to things. So being aware of it gives us this opportunity to intervene in the reactive aspects of our behavior and our thinking, so that we're not, it's a pleasant experience. Oh, I want more, it's unpleasant. Oh, I've got to get away from that. It's neutral. Well, I'm not even really aware of it, or I'm bored. We can see that becomes actually quite important. And certainly the Buddha pointed to it as very important. And then the third foundation is usually called mind states or states of mind. And it's not so much thoughts, although we can see thoughts are kind of intertwined in here. It's more just like, are you angry? Are you happy? And the Buddha gives these sort of like, is the mind concentrated, or is it distracted? Is the mind bright? Is it dull? He talks about a contracted mind or an uncontracted mind. So it's kind of just your state of mind, which again isn't exactly something that we typically would say, well, what's your state of mind? I mean, you might be asked that, but not easy necessarily to tag it, what exactly it is. So this takes some, mindfulness to see. And then the fourth foundation is even the hardest one to characterize. And the translations aren't even very satisfactory, but Bhikkhu Bodhi translates the fourth foundation as phenomena. But then what it turns out to be is these Buddhist lists: the Four Noble Truths, the 5 hindrances, the 7 factors of enlightenment. So all these lists, and so that's the 4 foundations of mindfulness, and that's very shortened. There's more that can be said about each of them, but I want to actually compare that, as that's kind of how the one sutta, the most famous sutta, the Satipatthana Sutta, presents them. In the Mindfulness of Breathing Sutta, which purports to kind of parallel this, there are these variations that are somewhat, well, I don't know if they're illuminating. They're certainly intriguing. The first foundation is very similar to the beginning of the Satipatthana, where it just is about the breath. But it very quickly says, don't just be aware of the breath, but be aware of your whole body as you're breathing. And then it says, and then calm the body as you're breathing. So now what's clear right away is that where the first teaching, the Satipatthana, is really just like a bunch of lists of things to pay attention to. In the Anapanasati, the Mindfulness of Breathing Sutta, it's not just things to pay attention to, but it's ways to pay attention and places to what we could call incline the mind, incline your mind towards calming, or perhaps just, if you, I mean, there are debates about what it all means, but perhaps it's just, if you pay attention to your breath enough, your body will become calm naturally. And I think most of us have experienced things like that. You're just paying attention to your breath, and then after a while, you start to settle, and there's these changes that start to happen. But the Buddha here is suggesting that we should really, I guess, encourage those things, or maybe even look for those things to happen. So this is, again, this sort of difference. And I find the Anapanasati, these instructions to feel the whole body as you're breathing and to calm the body, this, I think, is very helpful. These are really, because it's really giving you, oh, okay, yeah, that's a good, that's we're kind of seeing what we want to get out of meditation is kind of presented there. So the second section, which is supposed to be paralleling the section on feeling, the pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, starts by immediately saying, breathing in and breathing out, notice this pleasant feeling, this joy or rapture that's arising. Okay, so it's not just saying notice whether it's pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Notice this pleasant thing. So it, again, suggests that if we just are following these instructions, that this is where it's likely to take us. Again, I think many people have experienced things like this, but there are plenty of times when you don't. So it's not, here it gets a little complicated. But I'll take you through it, and then take you through this particular group, and then talk a little bit about how I work with it. So it says there are 4 steps in each section of this sutta. I know it gets confusing, but just to keep, for you to have some sense of where I'm going. So you're breathing in and breathing out, feeling this pleasant, rapturous feeling, breathing in and breathing out, letting that rapturous feeling kind of settle so that you're feeling just a subtle happiness or joy, tranquility. And then becoming aware of what's called mental formations, what's arising. And then calming those mental formations. So now, again, we have this calming, we have this specific guidance to do certain things. It isn't just notice these things, notice them and incline and move towards these certain spaces. So this, for me, is very challenging because I'm not always in a rapturous mood when I meditate. I don't know about you, but I want to know, well, if I'm not there in that space, then what do I do? And certainly this is a question that I confronted a long time ago in my practice, and that I've dealt with a great deal. And that is, for me, to completely absorb into whatever is arising, rather than oh, I'm supposed to feel good. I'm not feeling good. Oh man, what do I do now? It's rather, oh, this is what I'm feeling. I'm just going to really embrace this and let this be here and breathe with it. So the breathing with it, I think, is really helpful because it doesn't let you get too lost in it. The breath keeps you in your body. So it's oh, there's a feeling here, but I'm just sitting here breathing, and there's a feeling. And it also helps us to stay in touch with the energetic aspect of whatever feeling is happening. And what's important in this context about the fact that these feelings have an energetic quality is that energy is something that is constantly in motion. It's constantly moving. And so it reminds us, and it doesn't even have to remind us, we can see very clearly that it's not static, and that therefore it's not a solid thing that's got its grip on us. This feeling, whatever it is just coming and going with the breath. It's not a solid thing. It might be unpleasant, but it's not overwhelming because I can see that it's just passing through. I've been really looking at this stuff lately a lot in my own That's my daily practice. I usually sit for 45 minutes each morning, and the language, these suttas they're so they're coming out of such a different sort of world and almost way of thinking from what I think of as like my world, and I think our world, our sort of view of psychology and what is a human being, like thoughts and sense impressions and feelings, and so that when these scholars translate the language, I'm not sure how much they're getting it right. And that's like, a risky thing to say because they know a lot more than I do. But I'm always trying to like, okay, what are they talking about? What is this thing? Because this is what's happening, right? And this is what we're always faced with when we look directly at these early Buddhist teachings, trying to like be very clear. What am I experiencing, or how can I just like characterize what I'm experiencing, and then what does it say about what you might be experiencing? So again, I've come to see this term that's translated as rapture as being much more of just an energetic feeling. And so I can be sitting and there's this energy in me, but it doesn't have like an emotional tone to it. And this is where, I'm curious, right? That it's really more just the nervous system a little fired up. And it's possible, let's just say, that this is what the Buddha is talking about here, that he's not really talking about an emotion or even a mood, but rather just the state of the nervous system. And that as you meditate and this odd thing happens, that as the mind settles, that this energy goes the other direction in the body at times. And that it's kind of like, and I talk about this kind of thing often enough, that as you take away all the suppressive mechanisms of the mind and all the busyness on the surface that's functioning to suppress the unconscious, and not just the unconscious thinking, but the nervous system's unconscious, if we can say such a thing. I'm making up some interesting new things here. That as you remove that, not only does the psychological nervous system or psychological subconscious arise, but the nervous system's subconscious arises, which is this bright energy called piti. All right, so there's a theory for you. So we go through this. There's the body, the breath, and the calming of the body and the breath. There are the feelings and the energies, and then the calming of those energies. And then the third foundation, which in mind states, in the Anapanasati, it points to 4 specific things: concentration, or I'm sorry, that's one of them, but it's not the first one. Just being aware of the mind. And, that's like, well, what does that mean? Well, that's a good question. Being aware of breathing in and breathing out, being aware of the mind. Breathing in, breathing out, gladdening the mind. So again, we're kind of being encouraged to sort of evoke a certain state. Breathing in and breathing out, concentrating the mind. And then breathing in and breathing out, liberating the mind, which, according to all the scholars, means letting go of all the hindrances, all the obstructions. So Bhikkhu Bodhi, I'm sorry if this is one of these, I hope this is of some interest or making some sense. Bhikkhu Bodhi thinks that this group that's around the feelings and the group that's around the mind are meant to do the same thing, just in different realms. That the one around the feeling is meant to make us very mindful of feelings, give space for feelings, calm feelings. The one around the mind is supposed to be very sensitive to the mind, and then give space for what's in the mind, and then calm the mind. So he's saying that don't think of this as a progression. Like, oh, I work with my body, then I work with feelings, and I work with mind. He's like, go where your natural inclination takes you. Start by calming the body with the breath, and then see where do you get attuned most easily? Do you get most attuned to your feeling, to sort of a feeling mode, or to a mind mode? Then the fourth area in the Anapanasati, which was called phenomena in the Four Foundations, is much more clearly about insight, because it says, as you're breathing in and breathing out, be aware of impermanence. As you're breathing in and breathing out, be aware of the fading away of passion, of grasping, craving. As you're breathing in and breathing out, being aware of the cessation of that craving and of just things ending. As you're breathing in and breathing out, let go. So the last step is just letting go. So it's very interesting that, these are supposed to be parallel suttas, and this is why I bring this up. These are supposed to be parallel suttas, but you look at the fourth foundation of mindfulness and it doesn't say anything about breathing. It says, be aware of the Four Noble Truths, the 5 hindrances, and the 7 factors of awakening, and a few other lists. And you look at the fourth one here, it says, be aware of impermanence and everything, fading away and ending and letting go. And you kind of go, well, how are these the same thing? So the way that I think, because this is kind of where we're trying to get to, the fourth foundation, the way that we can think about it is a couple ways. One of them is to think of it as, this is the stage of insight. That all of the earlier parts, particularly in the Anapanasati, are meant to calm the mind and body to a point where clarity comes, so that we can see clearly the truth of impermanence, and that we can let go of any clinging. But that it's very specific there in the Anapanasati. In the Satipatthana, the way I view it is actually quite different, but it's still about insight. So in the Satipatthana, saying, be aware of the Four Noble Truths, be aware of the hindrances, be aware of the 7 factors of awakening. This, one way I like to characterize this is, look at your experience through the lens of these Dharma teachings, rather than through the lens of your own self, your own viewpoint, like it's happening to me. Rather, it's like, oh, if I see things through the lens of the Four Noble Truths, I'm seeing, oh, there's suffering, and it's being caused by clinging. And if I let go of that clinging, it's going to end. So that's like a perspective, right? And it's a vital perspective. That's what we call a Dharma perspective, or right view. And so what I think, one way to sort of talk about these two approaches is that in the Satipatthana, when it's giving that, it's talking in a much more general way about how to be mindful in your life. And that could include while you're meditating. So while you're meditating, you can do this, but when you're not meditating, you can also do it. Whereas with the Anapanasati, it's very much like, when you're meditating, you do this. Like, you can't really see these things, that in the way that it's being suggested when you're not meditating. So I'd have to say like that the Anapanasati is much more of like a meditative instruction. It's interesting that Buddhadasa Bhikkhu, who was a really influential Thai forest master who died around 1992. He has a great book on the Mindfulness of Breathing Sutta. He doesn't seem to like the four foundations of mindfulness at all. Like he says sort of like disparaging things about it. He's like, that's not really useful. It's just a list of things that, it doesn't really tell you what to do. It's very striking. I was really shocked when I read that. But I mean, he has a point. The Satipatthana kind of gives these things you could pay attention to, and that's helpful. The Anapanasati says, here's how to do this whole practice. So I don't know if I'm just confusing matters for you guys, because I'm so deep into this topic that it might be difficult for me to talk about it in a sort of introductory way. I might be sort of like too far off into my own thing about this. I've been, as most of you know, I've been writing about this, and I'm 200 pages into that now, and starting to get ready to do the editing. When maybe after I edit it, I'll understand it a little better. I went to graduate school in creative writing, and my professor was Thomas Keneally, the great Australian author, and Tom would get frustrated with students who would keep writing the first chapter of their novel over and over. They would come to workshop one time and they'd get critiqued. And then like a month later, they'd come back and they'd have the same chapter, but just rewritten. And he'd be like, just keep going. And he said, and this is a guy who, won the Pulitzer Prize and has written like 30 novels. He said, I don't know what my novels are about until I've written the first draft. That was pretty striking. He's one of the, sort of world-class author, just said, like, don't try to figure it out. Now, I can't say the same thing about a Dharma book, but in a way, that's where I am with this, that I have to really figure out what I've written and if it's worth anything. So I hope I haven't just really confused you all tonight on this, but and maybe if you ask some questions, we can make more sense of it. So I'll just open it up for questions now. Or maybe it's been too opaque for it to even evoke a question. And what's this have to do with recovery anyway? Just confusing. Julie, hi. Oh, you can?
Hello, Kevin, and hello, Sangha. It's always wonderful to be here with you, and thank you, Kevin, for your offerings tonight. I think I am a little bit confused. I thought I heard you say kind of at the beginning of your talk that you sometimes, I'm not using your exact words, question the translation of the translators or teachers, which was almost kind of a little gutsy of you because, quote unquote, they know more than I do. And of course, I really resonated with that because I question all the time what my teachers tell me, because I just like to start at the beginning. I don't always like to assume that the truth is what people who supposedly know more than I do think it is. It's my own arrogance and my curiosity. So, but then toward the end, and I thought I understood you, and then toward the end, you said something about seeing your meditation or having your meditation experience through the eyes of your teachers.
Through the lens of the Dharma, through the lens of the Dharma.
Okay, I
Right.
got the lens of the teachers
No,
and
no,
I
no.
got very confused. Okay,
No,
through
no,
the
through the
lens
lens
of
of
the,
Dharma. Yeah.
thank, thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
makes sense to me.
Well,
Okay,
thank you for asking, because yeah, I know with all the words I'm throwing out there, it can get confusing.
and so for me, the parallel, if I can say one more thing, for me, the parallel to recovery, because this is where I went,
Good.
is I do sometimes question when I'm in, for example, a 12-step meeting, and I am
Mhm.
multi-fellowship, but I question what those who supposedly know, who do know more than I do, they have more experience, they have recovery, they have whatever, more knowledge, certainly, and understanding. But I do question what their truth is. And I allow room for differences between their experience and mine. And at the end of the day, because I can get very tripped up with words and languaging,
Mhm.
I do try to frame my experience through the lens of the intention of recovery.
Yeah,
So to me, that's what the parallel is. Thank you for letting me share.
that's nice. Thanks, Julie. That's great. Yeah, I mean, if certainly in the recovery world, I mean, there's a lot of opinions, and yeah, it's always that balance between um, trusting ourselves and also listening to others, and trying to sort out. And certainly when I first got sober, it was suggested maybe you should listen to other people, and that was really important for me in the beginning. But eventually I sort of came to feel that I had a good you know that I became able to make better choices on my own than I had been. um, and so I did become more independent in my thinking about recovery. But of course, the problem in the beginning is that we come in usually pretty rebellious, and so it's kind of like doing what's appropriate at a given time. And if you come in and you don't want to listen to anybody or do anything, then it's probably not going to go too well. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess everybody has their own path. And Julie, I'm not actually speaking directly to you, but I don't mean to be talking to you. And when I'm saying any of this, I'm just speaking generally. Uh, yeah. So I don't want you to take that as something personal at all. It was really just about generally how I see people coming into recovery programs. It's always a balance. Other thoughts? Hello, Mike.
Hey, Kev. Long time no see. I'm Mike from New York.
Yeah.
And thank you so much. Yeah, I'm Mike, I'm an alcoholic, and thanks so much for continuing these meetings. They're great. And whenever I can, I always enjoy stopping by and hear your perspective. And one of the things that grabbed me too when you said that all of this is subject to interpretation, and it has been interpreted almost endlessly over the thousands of years. And one of the things that I always suggest to people whenever I'm in a meeting and I'm sitting in the hot seat is to, use the proverbial take what you need and leave the rest.
Right.
Because to me, it's like the old saw about the finger pointing at the moon is not the moon, but the signposts are important.
Yeah.
And the work that you do is important to folks like me because you're willing to dig in and do all that digging, and you share the benefit of what you found with the rest of us, which I think is great. It's very worthwhile. I always enjoy your perspective, and I always get something out of these meetings, so I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Mike. It's interesting because I do have this kind of dual sense of, or I guess I would say sort of competing voices. The one is, that is very rebellious, or just, let's say, independent and wanting to really find my own path, because no matter how much someone tells me about how to meditate or how to be sober or how to be a Buddhist or whatever, I'm the one who's experiencing it and who's dealing with the inner experience, the thoughts and feelings, and having to cope with that. And so in a lot of ways, I feel I have, forged my own way, and it is what I've, wound up have wound up sharing with the world, if you will. But at the same time, particularly when it comes to these early Buddhist teachings, I do have this sense that, like, this guy really knew something. He knew something, and he figured it out, but more than figuring it out, he had this, through this work that he did, he was able to have this transformative experience. And that becomes very alluring. And I want to be smart about it. Like, there's some people who know some stuff I just don't know. And this guy particularly seemed to really figure some stuff out. And I'd like to try to really understand what he figured out and see how I can apply it. And boy, that's hard. It is really hard. And obviously, particularly, we are in an era of, this deep study into early Buddhist teachings, which I'm not sure it's ever been done historically in the way it's being done today, because the tradition was a tradition, and it was handed down. This is what we're handing down. And so, yeah, from generation to generation, there were different variations and subtle changes. And then you had these, people who jumped off and went in completely different directions, like the Tibetans and the Japanese, and you get Zen and you get Vajrayana, but with the access we have, for instance, the Bhikkhu Analayo is presumably the first person who ever got a hold of the Pali texts and the Chinese texts called agamas, which are parallel, that seem to have been, like, some of the Chinese things were actually preserved. Like, there were some Chinese who came to India and got a hold of the Pali Canon. They took it back to China, but they kind of put it away. Whereas in South Asia, in Burma, Thailand, Sri Lanka, they kept it alive, and so it kind of evolved. They might have tweaked it a little bit. So when you get the Chinese version and you compare it to the Pali version, all of a sudden you get like, oh, wait, this seems to be what it really was. So we're trying to get at, what did the Buddha actually really say, or what was preserved at the earliest point that he said. Of course, we don't know that he really said it, but because there's a lot of consistency, in these thousands of pages, that he keeps saying the same stuff over and over. We figure it must have been pretty close to this. In any case, we're winding up, we've got this era. And the other thing about it is that this work has always been done in a monastic environment, which again was very much a tradition. It was being handed down. There wasn't like, you didn't have a young monk going, I don't know, teacher, do you maybe this didn't mean that? It's like, I don't think that was the way that, the young monks would behave. It was just like, well, here it is. You just take that, learn that, do that. And so we have this, our Western approached, everything is like very questioning and bring this skeptical mind and analytical mind and this scientific mind. And so we're getting this version of Buddhism that's it's quite profound, I think. I know that there are people who are watering down Buddhism on one side, but on the other side, I think we're getting people who are going into it in a way that maybe historically has never been done. If we didn't have smartphones, we'd probably all be enlightened. That's probably the whole problem for us. So I guess we're about out of time. I appreciate you guys showing up, and everybody didn't leave, so I guess it wasn't so bad, but I feel a little bad for not quite being. What I was trying to present tonight was actually too much, and I didn't have time to do it. And so I hope it wasn't just, I hope it was helpful, let's say, in some way, that you heard something that was useful. I will be back on Tuesday morning. And in the meantime, don't think too much about what I talked about tonight, but try to apply mindfulness in all activities.